Okay, we are getting ready. People are still joining. We'll give them another minute or so. We just had a great conversation with Lori Lewis from JLL, Antonia Cardone from Cushman & Wakefield, and Lenny Bedoin from CBRE about what was happening in the corporate occupier space. And now we're getting ready to have a conversation with Jeremy Neuner. But we had a lot of fun last time just seeing where everybody was from. So as you're entering the room, just put in the chat where you're from. I don't know if people know this, but about 40% of our readership is international. So I'm really looking forward to this, Jeremy. I'm curious to hear what you're going to have to say today.
I'm curious what I'm going to say today. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Bob. I really appreciate it. This is yet one more step in our long adventure together, thinking about this stuff.
Cool. Good. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? This is our fourth and final week of programs. Jeremy, you've got the cleanup spot here.
Great.
So, looking forward to this. We've had a great series of programs, lots of great speakers, sharing some great content. So I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you for attending. I'm Bob Fox, principal at Fox Architects and publisher of Work Design Magazine. We've had a lot of fun with this series of programs that Work Design Magazine has put together in an effort to provide a comprehensive look at getting back to the office. We've called it Work Design Flex, and we're really looking at how much more flexible and multidimensional the workplace is becoming. And we hope that we've shed some insight and intelligence on what's happening and the options available getting back to work. So we're wrapping up our series today with a look to the future. But before we get started, I just want to thank all of our presenters and their teams. It's been great working with everybody. We appreciate your support. Jeremy, I'd like to thank you for being here. I know we're all very busy, and we appreciate the generous contribution of your time and your expertise.
For sure. I'm happy to be here.
I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Envoy, who's been with us through the whole thing, HPFI and Nook. Our sponsors are critical to support the conversation. These conversations, I think, really kind of keep us in the loop, share ideas, share what's going on. And so the generous support of our sponsors make all of this possible. So a big thank you to all of you. So today, Jeremy and I are just going to have a conversation. It's focused on some of his thoughts and ideas about the future. We'll have some Q&A. So if you have a question, put it in the chat or the question and answer thing. As appropriate, I'll try to get to those. And so today, I'm just going to jump right into the program. And I'm really excited about this. So Jeremy, I'm going to go back. I think that I know you're chomping at the bit, but just to give people a little bit of background, I'm fortunate to be here with you. We share a passion for the workplace and all the great stuff, that surrounds it. I think we first met in San Francisco, and I can't remember what I was doing there. I think it was for a Work Design Magazine program. But at the time, you were the CEO of NextSpace, which was a very early forward-thinking co-working space. So just you want to give us some background behind that real quick?
Yeah. By early, I think you mean way too early, sort of the story of my life. But yeah, we started NextSpace in 2008 here in Santa Cruz, California. And grew it to 9 locations, most of them in California, both northern and southern. And then we actually had a location in Chicago as well. And built that up to 9 locations, several thousand members, and a really cool community of people who were trying to figure out, as we talked about it, how to make a living and make a life on their own terms, as opposed to the terms of, big companies and sort of the 9-to-5 job. And that went great until about 2015 or so. And then business became tough after that.
And then that was when you went to Google. And
I actually took a year off, helped a friend start a nonprofit. And then I started Google in early 2016. Spent a couple of years working on their workplace team. And for the last 3.5 years, I have been working on our developer relations team, and I help run a global series of startup acceleration programs.
And then I think it was 2013 or so, you wrote a book and you gave a keynote for a Work Design Magazine event, which was great. So why don't you share a little bit about your book?
Yeah, this is one more chance to say being early is not always awesome. But in 2013, my Nextbase co-founder Ryan Coonerty and I wrote a book called The Rise of the Naked Economy. This is my time to say that naked was just a metaphor. Everybody gets to keep their clothes on. But it was about sort of this big disaggregation of the workforce. Away from big companies, away from big offices, and towards more entrepreneurship, more people being out there as independents. And a lot of what we talked about in 2013, I think, is humbly starting to come true a little bit here in 2021 and beyond, as we think about what life looks like post-pandemic and kind of in this new frontier that we're all on.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you tell us what you're working on now?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I run a global series of startup accelerators at Google, and we work with startups all over the world. But the idea of workplace, especially about the why of the workplace, is something that I've sort of continued to think about and talk about and write about over the course of the last several years, sort of on the side. So it's really great to have the opportunity, Bob, to spend some time here with you and the rest of the folks on the webinar to talk through some of this stuff.
Great. No, and I think, this conversation is really looking forward to say, what's coming, after the pandemic, and what do we think the workplace is, how do we think it's going to change, or what are going to shape it? So, but let me ask you, I mean, COVID really forced a jump forward in technology, and how do you look at that? What's changed? What are the biggest advances that you see for the workplace?
Yeah, so the pandemic has caused this great natural experiment. And, lots of people have written about, post-pandemic life in lots of different ways. And one of the great themes is that the pandemic didn't really cause any shifts. It sort of accelerated shifts that were already underway. A good example is, hey, we were already moving towards online retail and away from brick and mortar, and the pandemic accelerated that as we all sort of moved to online retailers because we couldn't shop at brick and mortar. So this shift away from, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday at the office, which is a paradigm that we've had for, many, many decades, that was already underway. And now the pandemic had just sort of shifted and accelerated that. So I think, yeah, technology is the underpinning of that. But it's technology that we've had for a while, laptops and cell phones and Wi-Fi and all that sort of stuff is not new. It's been around, most of us have had this for the last, 5-10 years at least. So the technology has been there. The pandemic had just sort of enabled the shift.
So flexibility has been, a big topic of conversation, and now we're talking about hybrid work environments. Share a little bit with us, what you see happening there. I mean, can people choose? Can organizations demand? How is that going to play out?
All right, this is a chance for me to spend a couple minutes on my soapbox here. And I think in order to kind of understand that question, you have to sort of step way back in time and think through the 200,000 year long history of human work and kind of what got us to this point. So bear with me as I give you a little amateur anthropology to sort of tee this up.
We're all ears.
All right, hopefully. So 200,000 years ago, we were a hunter-gatherer society, right? We had to work together in the same place at the same time to hunt the mammoth and gather food and stuff like that. You move into an agricultural society, same thing, right? We all have to be on the farm at the same time in the same place to grow and harvest the crops, and then same time, same place to process those crops and turn them into food. The same thing happens in the industrial economy, right? Big giant factories. We all have to be there at the same time in the same place. And we kind of morphed that into the information economy, largely because the tools of the trade in the information economy were like these big giant boxy computers and servers and mainframes in the basement and all that sort of stuff. So sort of throughout that whole history that I just sort of outlined, we had to be in the same place at the same time to get work done because of the way we did work. Now, some great spillover benefits happened as a result. We invented language and culture and fire and stuff like that. We learned how to work together. We learned how to cooperate. We learned how to innovate. So there was some great, no one said, hey, let's all get together so we can innovate. People said, hey, let's all get together to grow the crops. And then this sort of collective innovation was sort of a nice spillover benefit. So we're at this really, really interesting moment right now. And I really think, I don't think it's too big of an exaggeration to say, for the first time in the 200,000 year long history of human work, we've got choices, right? We've got the ability to say, I actually don't need to be in the mammoth hunting party or the farm or the factory or the giant office building with the mainframe in the basement to be able to get work done. So we're just now, for the first time, saying, my company isn't necessarily the aggregating force anymore. Instead, something else is going to be the aggregating force. And to me, I think what makes sense here is that regardless of where and how we aggregate, the thing that we want more than anything are those spillover benefits that I mentioned a couple minutes ago, right? We want connection, we want community, we want collaboration, we want innovation, right? Those were the secondary benefits of everybody kind of working together, but now they're going to be the primary thing that everybody's after. And so how we come together, how we aggregate, who we aggregate with, where we do it, those are all big questions that we haven't really had to think much about for a really long time. And now we're sort of forced, again, the pandemic being that sort of accelerating factor. Now we're really forced to think about, well, who do we need to work with? Where do we need to work? When do we need to work? It's no longer dictated from a top-down perspective. I think it's going to be dictated a lot more bottom-up. So that opens up a whole bunch of questions that we can kind of dive into.
So, I mean, there's a big debate going on right now about, being in the office or working remote, and is that a distraction from what you see occurring, as things change?
I guess I'll preface everything I'm going to say by look, this is the first step of what's going to be a decades long, I think, sort of rethinking and restructuring. So you decide to go fully remote, you decide to go hybrid, you decide to, force everybody to come into the office Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, whatever it is you choose to do, do it in a way where that it's sort of the first step in trying to figure this out. So whatever you choose today likely isn't what you'll do if you're being thoughtful about it, 6, 12 months from now, 2, 3 years from now, 2, 3 decades from now. I mean, really go into it as the first step in a major fundamental, never before done rethinking about work in the workplace. So I think the message there is whatever you do now is an experiment.
So, I think building on that sort of idea, I mean, people and talent are in big demand. And there was actually just an article in the Wall Street Journal this morning, about technology, companies and reaching out and competing now with the local companies for talent. So, is the workplace something that you think is going to be important in the future, to attract talent, or is it going to become disconnected?
I think, look, I think workplace is still important. So I don't want to be the doom and gloom guy that says all of you people who are, architects and corporate real estate people and all that kind of stuff are now out of a job and will be for the next century. So don't worry, Bob, you still have a job. But what I'm,
I was worried about that.
right, thanks, I think, right?
Yeah.
What I'm arguing instead is that, what's the reason behind the workplace? Asking that question. And the reason for no longer is because that's where you have to go to get work done, right? So going back to those sort of spillover benefits that I talked about before, well, okay, the workplace should be a place then where we're coming together to collaborate, to innovate, to come up with new ideas. I still believe, and this gets back to my amateur anthropology bit, we do that work really well in person. We are hard coded because of that 200,000 years of human history, of human work. We do this a lot better in person. One of my favorite aphorisms is that technology evolves way faster than people evolve. And we haven't really evolved much past those, hunter-gatherer mammoth hunting parties. We do that really well together. Yes, there'll be remote work, and this is a remote conversation. My argument is always, like, if we were in the same room together, this would go differently, and I don't know, maybe better, but something happens when we gather together to build community, to build connection, to collaborate, to innovate. So that's going to be sort of, I think, one of those forcing functions, and one of those ways that folks who are thinking about the workplace will need to say, hey, it used to be, this is the office was a place everybody had to go. Now, how do we make it so a place where people want to go when they want to get a particular kind of work done?
Also, you talk a little bit about the tools, may have been hunting at some point, but, there are tools that we all use today. A lot of those are technology. But are those common shared tools, or are those something that we'll all have, access to as individuals?
I guess it depends what you mean by tools. I mean, you can use I don't know how many people are on this call, but we're probably all using a different laptop, right? A different, brand, a different operating system, whatever, but we're all accessing this same shared tool. If it's like, hey, in order to do your job, you have to access these tools. How you access them is going to be probably a little bit more of a personal decision. But the tools themselves, I think, are definitely something that have to be common. We can't have this if we're, some of us are on Zoom, and some of us are on Skype, and some of us are, is Skype even a thing anymore? And some of us are on Google Meet, or whatever. So.
Well, yeah, I think video conferencing and Zoom is an example of that. But I think there's been a lot of technology, that has not been fully embraced by the workplace, and so I think as we look out, things like Alexa, IA, I think, is just starting to come in, robots, those kinds of things. How do you see those things, emerging, if they emerge, in the way that we work and how we work together and where we work from?
I think one of the most interesting areas. There's two really interesting areas to explore from a technology perspective. First one is how do we better do asynchronous work, and how do we do better asynchronous communication? Is it what you and I might do in the workplace, where we have a 30-second chat? I'm walking by your desk. Hey, Bob, I have a quick question on that thing, and you say, great, here's the answer. And then, it takes, all of 30 seconds to sort of make something go forward in a small way. Well, now I get to send you an email, and do you look at the email, and you looked at it, but it took you a day, and it took you a day to respond. And pretty soon, like, what took 30 seconds, now is stretched into days and days and days, or at least, even it stretches into minutes or hours. That's still, orders of magnitude longer than it would have taken us if we'd been in the same office. So I think this idea of asynchronous communication, where you can kind of mimic that, through a little video chat where I record that question, you can really quickly respond to it. There's companies called Loom and things like that have these kinds of applications. But how do we get out of our inboxes, which as far as I can tell, nobody likes anymore. Certainly if you're under 30, I don't think people even know what what email is. And how do you basically mimic those synchronous moments and make them really easy to use asynchronously? The other thing that I think is really interesting to think about is AR and VR. It would be great if we could kind of get to the Tony Stark version where, he waves his hands and all these screens come up and we can, start to move things around. I think we're sort of a long way from that, but how do you basically augment this experience a little bit better, to be able to create those connections and those collaborations, that as I said, are so vital to sort of being an innovative company. I don't think that the AR and VR, we're a long way from it being good enough where we can start to mimic that human to human interaction. I don't think we'll be able to ever say to ourselves, unless technology over the course of the coming decades becomes really, really good, that, hey, sitting next to you in real life is just the same as sitting next to you in some sort of virtual reality. Again, humans are hard coded to be together. So those will be great tools, but I don't think that they will ever mimic that in-person interaction. In-person interaction, again, is really good for the hard, interesting, naughty, collaborative, innovative work that a lot of companies want us to do.
You talked earlier about things shifting from us working together in groups to where you're seeing, I think, us being more, the focus being more on individuals and maybe less actual work together, in certain places. But, I'm just wondering, how do you think that's going to shape the organization? And maybe how does that shape real estate, commercial real estate or office space, as you look out into the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is sort of a naughty one from sort of a company culture, from sort of a HR perspective, from sort of a protecting the company IP perspective, because I just saw a conversation where people were asking themselves, hey, if we don't have to come to the office a couple of days a week in a hybrid work environment, who's got some ideas for cool places outside of home to work? And so it was, and which beach in Santa Cruz, gets 4 bars of LTE signal, what are the coolest coffee shops? What are the, where are cool public parks? Are there interesting co-working spaces or whatever? So people are already thinking about, okay, I'm not at work all the time. I'm sort of overworking at home. I miss people and I miss that vibe and things like that. So where else can I go? And so I think what's going to start to happen is, and having come from the co-working industry, I sort of saw this happen over the course of several years, is that people will start to come together from, one person from this company and 2 people from that company and 3 entrepreneurs here and, 4 independent consultants there, and they'll start to create their own little community. I mean, imagine just like, hey, we're the Tuesday crew who always shows up at this coffee shop, and pretty soon we get to know each other and we talk about, our kids and our family and our work and our pets and whatever. And we may have nothing to do with each other professionally, in terms of, who signs our paycheck, so to speak. But we start to form these interesting little knots of community. And what can tend to start to happen, and I saw this a lot at NextSpace, is when, the IT professional from one company is sitting around having a nice chat over a cup of coffee with a HR person from another company who and is overheard from the freelance designer, and all of a sudden they start to do stuff together. And by do stuff, it could be something as simple as like, hey, kick around ideas, all the way up to, I saw people, well, hey, let's go do this thing and start their own companies. So there's going to be these interesting communities that people are going to self-aggregate around. I think a lot of people are. And I think companies will have to think really hard about, okay, well, you know, what does this mean for, you know, where people are starting to self-identify more with the, you know, Tuesday coffee crew and less with my company. And then certainly that's sort of, you know, kind of a high level issue, but then like, oh my God, what happens when, you know, my IP starts to leak, or my, you know, company secret sauce or whatever starts to leak out. So that's going to be a real challenge. And I
You
don't
know,
know that I have a solution for it.
what I find fascinating about that is that it kind of works both ways. You know, because it's almost like, you know, an organization is going to need to have that kind of community or that kind of interaction in order to innovate.
Absolutely. So I think, you know, one way to think about it, especially for larger companies, where, you know, the HR people are on that floor in that building and the engineering people are over there and the sales people are over there, you know, how do you give people the flexibility, at least internal to a company, to have that same thing happen, but now it all happens inside the actual organization. I think that's something that's something that folks right now today can start to explore, is how do we get that internal mixing and that, you know, trading of ideas happening right now, inside your office. And that might actually be a forcing function of like, yeah, I actually want to go to the office because, you know, I like the people from sales or HR or engineering or whatever. And I've gotten to know them and we started to kick around ideas and, you know, boom, the next $1 billion product just got made, you know, without anybody really trying, you know. So that's something that you can explore right now, I think, inside of your office spaces, is how do you get that cross-functional mixing? That's where the innovation is really going to come from, I think. And we don't do enough of that now because we say, again, well, the HR people sit over there and the sales people sit over there. Bring them together.
You sort of got me thinking. I mean, a lot of our audience here are designers and facility managers and, you know, people that are responsible for, you know, the corporate real estate. That concept, how do you think that's going to change, you know, what the office looks like? Now, because we're probably not going to do the, you know, individual heads down work, or we'll do less of that, you know, in the office.
Yeah, I think you could design for a couple of different things. I mean, people are going to have different kinds of modes of work, right? There's going to be that heads down, you know, focused work that, you know, if you're an engineer, that looks like one thing. You know, if you're a program manager like me and I've got to, like, you know, put together a giant strategy doc for somebody, like, I need quiet, you know, focus time to do that. Maybe there's a nook or a corner somewhere in an office building. Or maybe I say, you know what, I'm going to do that work at home. But then when it comes time to sort of like shop that stuff around and get input and ideas, you know, you want to come together with sort of as interesting and diverse group of people as you can. Again, even if that's internal. So I think a lot of what corporate real estate can start to look like is a co-working space, right? Hey, I'm done with my focused work, and I'm going to, you know, go to this central area. The way we thought about it at Next Space actually was we had this sort of central area that sort of functioned as sort of the town square, right? And if you go think about like a small town with or even a, you know, big town, the town square was sort of the crossroads, right? The town square was where everybody kind of came together, kind of socially, professionally, culturally. You know, they passed through, they hung out, they traded ideas, and then they sort of retreated back to wherever their, you know, shop or their office was. But that town square kind of created this really, really interesting mix of people. And I think that is an idea that you can really mimic inside your office, where this sort of co-working collaborative space is literally at the center. And there are ways that you could design that where people kind of have to and want to cross through that. And there's reasons to sort of be there and kind of get those little bits of information or conversation or gossip or whatever from the other folks passing through, and that'll inform the work that you do when you retreat back to those heads down moments. And again, who knows, you know, every 10,000th interaction that happens in that town square will result in something new and amazing. And, you know, but you have to have 10,000 of those interactions for that 10,000th one to sort of be the one that pushes the company, the organization in a new direction.
Yeah, I want to kind of maybe shift the conversation a little bit, but
Sure.
you're familiar with Matt Mullenweg, who's
Mm-hmm.
the CEO of WordPress, and he has his 5 levels of distributed work. Which actually, just let me share my screen here so I can,
Sure.
so people are familiar with that. But anyway, he has, you were talking earlier about the asynchronous, work and the process. And, he's basically saying level 0 here is, you're plugged into the VPN network, and you can access information, and level, 5 is where, a company can do anything at any time, anywhere in the world. That sort of, maybe speaks to a little bit of a different approach given what you just described, in that, common town square concept. So, how do you look at this, and how do you balance that?
Yeah, well, the first thing that I love about Matt's taxonomy here is that it exactly mimics Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And I don't think that's an accident. Where I've got the basics, I got the food and the water, and I'm sort of safe and secure, and then I've got community, and then I've got love and affection, and all of a sudden I have this great self-actualization at the top. I mean, it's exactly the same as what Matt's done here. What I like about this, again, is that it takes into account this idea that we can be remote, we can be distributed, we can be asynchronous. What it doesn't take into account, I think, is this idea that, again, people don't evolve anywhere nearly as quickly as technology evolves, right? So technology will allow us to sort of climb up to the top of this pyramid that Matt's shown here. But it doesn't really solve, I think, for this really, really deep, innate, hard-coded need and desire to connect and collaborate with each other. Now, what I'll say is that the people that you do this with, that you connect and collaborate with, may not be the same people that you're climbing this pyramid with, right? So that's the part that I think really needs to be thought about, is that you and I are working for the same company, we're on the same team, and we can sort of together climb this sort of pyramid to Matt's nirvana and never actually meet each other in person. Okay, no problem. That we can probably still do good work, but you and I are going to need these other outlets individually to be able to connect with other people. Yeah, I could go join the local bowling league and hang out with guys that way, but I also think that you need to encourage that somehow from a professional sense as well, because again, those small human to human moments kind of aggregate together, I think, into the kind of innovation that companies are looking for. I know a couple of companies that sort of try to do this, but one thing that they spend their money on, instead of spending their money on real estate and offices, what they spend their money on instead is once a quarter, once a year, whatever, fly everybody to some fabulous destination for 2 weeks to kind of scratch that itch of bringing everybody together, so that when they go back out and do this sort of asynchronous nirvana, that they remember that there's real life actual humans that they're doing it with. So that's sort of another approach, and there's companies that have been doing that for a decade or more.
Well, you described earlier about us maybe meeting on the beach together, but we were also talking about some of the technology, and I think the Alexa, the AR, the VR, avatars and things like that. You talk about that kind of advancing. So, we may not be there yet, but is that something that you see that would enable us to get to Matt's nirvana, without the physical presence?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be the kind of guy who's gonna say that yes, those will all be great tools, right? Just like the cell phone and the laptop are great tools that have enabled this. They will be an extension of those tools. Um, I'm gonna be, really, really reluctant to ever say that that's going to be good enough. It's going to be great, right? It's going to enable us to do all kinds of things, right? You can be on your boat in the Chesapeake Bay, and I can be on the beach in Santa Cruz, and we can, do amazing work together. Like that's great. When you're on your boat sailing, my little VR avatar will be there, and I'll be pulling the jib sheet in with you while we're like, talking through, sort of the latest strategy that we're going to employ for our company. And, when I'm on the beach in Santa Cruz, your little avatar will be there, with your rubber ducky inner tube and stuff like that. And, so those things will happen, I think, eventually, or some version of them. But it'll be really hard for me to say that there's not something more that can happen when there's some sort of interpersonal interaction, when there's some sort of connection that reminds me that behind that avatar of Bob on the beach in his rubber ducky inner tube, there's a human being, right? There's a human being who is real life flesh and blood, and has all the strengths and weaknesses and wondrousness about and foibles and all that sort of stuff. Like I think that's the stuff that engenders the kind of connection and trust that you need to be innovative, to take risks, to have that sort of psychological safety, to try to push something forward. So all those things will continue to be very useful tools, just like cell phones and laptops and Wi-Fi continue to be really useful tools, but they'll never completely supplant the fact that we're still human beings.
You've been studying the workplace and probably now the larger ecosystem. And, there's a lot of parts and pieces that have to interact in order for that to work. So, how is that sort of, thinking different from the way that we traditionally think about the workplace?
Yeah, I think this idea of, and this is something that, again, I think folks on the webinar can kind of think through and implement now, is what's my company's approved workplace ecosystem, right? Not just so, okay, we're going to be fully remote or fully in office, hybrid, whatever, but most people probably aren't going to be back Monday through Friday 9 to 5, at least in sort of the information and the innovation economy. So okay, you got to be at the office a couple 3 days a week, and oh, by the way, you better convince me of a really good reason why I need to be there. And then when you're not at the office, here are the kinds of places, or maybe the actual places, where we'd like you to be. Are these remote drop-in centers? Are these, coffee shops, but only ones that have sort of a certain kind of Wi-Fi for connectivity and security purposes? Are they other companies' offices, right? I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but like, hey, I work for company A, but I'm just going to swing by company B and hang out for the day, but that's not such a crazy idea if there's infrastructure there that's underutilized from the company's B perspective, and I can actually use from company A's perspective.
Well, actually, we're kind of doing that now. I mean, if you show up in Washington, D.C., I'd be happy to let you work in my office, for the
right.
day,
Yeah,
so.
exactly. Right. Well, but when you start to when companies start to think about like, well, okay, is now Jeremy going to tell Bob all of his company secrets and stuff like that, and I think there's some guardrails that need to be put around this, which is kind of why I call it this sort of approved ecosystem. And so, but look, we've kind of been doing that already, right? I mean, how many people on this call have not, opened up their laptop at, gate B27 at the San Jose airport while they're waiting for their flight, or how many people haven't, logged into some on their work computer to some, dicey hotel Wi-Fi or whatever. So this already kind of happens. And I think, structuring it more, being more thoughtful about it and putting some guardrails around it, I think is a big part of what corporate real estate is going to be going forward.
I'm just thinking back, we had an earlier conversation, about, the balance of life and, where do we get to have our best experience and, where we work best, and I'm just wondering, what do you think those spaces are and how do you think those are going to change?
Well, look, where you work best is going to be a decision that is going to be more and more driven by the individual and less by the company, right? So, and also who you are, right? I mean, I know engineers who would love nothing more than to work in a dark basement with very little light and just crank away all day and no one ever bother them, right? Like those folks or folks like that can sometimes work best in those environments. I would die after day one in that environment, so to sort of have a sort of mandate on, this is where you will go to do your best work, which if you think about it, has kind of been the mandate in corporate real estate. Here's your desk, right? Hope you like it. And if that works for you, great. And if it doesn't, not a lot of other options. So this is kind of what I mean about like those decisions are going to be driven a lot more bottom up. And I think the key to corporate real estate and getting back to the office over the course of the next, several years at least, is how do we design spaces that actually give people choice, right? Here's your desk. Don't like it, or don't like it right now for this task. Well, here's all these other options. Don't like that anymore because of something that's changed in you or your work. Well, then here's all these other options over there. And sort of thinking through those different work modes. It's a mess, right? Because corporate real estate likes to be very predictable, which I totally get, having spent some time in that world. Like, I want to be able to plan exactly like, who's going to be where and when, so I can exactly kind of right size my portfolio. Yeah, good luck. That's going to be hard to do. But I think there's still ways to sort of, I think there's still ways to try to do that, where you can create an environment inside of your actual portfolio that gives people that flexibility and choice.
We've got a question here, which I think it's probably appropriate to ask.
Oh, cool.
It's about trust and control of employees. How do we get to the point where we don't have to tell people where to be if not in the office? Any thoughts?
How do we get to the point where we don't have to tell people where to be if not in the office? I mean, sort of at that point now, right? Like, I mean, we again, we have this grand natural experiment for the last, 15, 18 months. Like, you can't come to the office, right? Because the office is closed. And people figured it out, right? I mean, people figured it out, inside their own four walls of their homes about, where they could work, and they could carve that space out. I was able to hack some things where I could get outside of the house every now and then, even at the height of the pandemic, and do it in a way that was sort of safe, for me and for other people. So people, are sort of endlessly innovative when it comes to this stuff. Sort of giving them the chance to be endlessly innovative, I think, is a big part of this. And look, I mean, I think we're sort of over. I'm trying to think of the right word, sort of over parental anyway, right? Where we think we've had this control over the course as sort of, companies and corporate real estate folks, we think we've had this control for a lot longer than we've actually had it, right? I don't think we've had as much control as we think we've had, again, because of technology, right? So far it's been, laptops and cell phones and things like that, where people are, taking that freedom and running with it.
Well, I think one of the challenges is, organizations feel like they have to, by decree, say where people are working. One of the things that I found very interesting, if you look at what Salesforce is doing, in some cases, they've pushed it down to their teams. and they basically ask their teams, where do you want to work? When do you want to work? And so that's been, a big shift in the way that they think about their space. And if you look at what Slack's doing now, that again, it's a very different approach to the workplace. So I think it's about, sort of the leadership, I don't want to call it babysitting, but it's almost like a distraction to the, enabling people to get their work done.
Yeah. I mean, I think, look, organizations decreed that this is where you'll work because for a long time, there wasn't any other choice. They could decree that, right? I mean, and it's only been in the last few years, maybe the last decade. And again, the pandemic has accelerated this, where it turns out, whoops, I guess we were wrong. I guess we don't have to decree that. And so that sort of this is as much sort of a mindset and a leadership change, or a mindset and leadership problem, as it is a sticks and bricks problem.
Well, there was a point where, we all, had to be connected. Everything was plugged in, wires were everywhere, we had a mess. Now it's like we've cut all the chains, and now it's like a totally different way of thinking about it.
Exactly. And so what really is required here is, again, and I'll go back to some of my original kind of amateur anthropology kind of comments that I started out with, is that, this is the first time in a 200,000 year long history of work where we're going to be forced to rethink why we get together, who we get together with, what do we do when we get together to work. Those things were all predetermined for us based on what we did and the tools we used to do it. And so if you're feeling a little adrift, if you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm not quite sure what to do, if you're feeling like, whoa, this is a really big change, it's because it is. Like, I don't think you can overstate this, that this is the first time in human history where many of us can really fundamentally rethink why we get together, who we get together with, where we get together, and what do we do there when it comes to work. So that's why I think, again, this is a decades-long experiment that will undo centuries of how we thought about work in the workplace. And so, I don't know, welcome to the revolution, folks. Like,
We've got another good question here. It's what are your thoughts on creating physical space depending for output-based outcomes? While technology is surely a great tool, the look and feel of spaces are stimulators.
Yeah, look, I mean, I am a big believer in, and this is a nod to all the architects and designers and the folks who sort of make it all happen from a real estate and facilities perspective. I'm a big believer that space can inspire. And so that, you can step into the Tate Modern in London and be like, whoa, like, or you can, I'll probably embarrass myself by thinking of more examples, but, space can inspire. It can inspire individually and it can inspire collectively. And then space can also sort of facilitate, right? Okay, now that we're inspired, now let's do something with that inspiration. So that's why, again, I think that, corporate real estate's not dead, by a long shot, but that should be the reason for having it. I think space can inspire, space can bring us together, space can help us innovate, as opposed to space is the place that I have to go to get the work done.
So that kind of brings to thought, there was a book I read this past year called Stealing Fire. And it was all about how to alter the way the brain thinks. And the book was not about the workplace. It was more about, how do we empower ourselves as humans to be able to think better and solve more complex problems.
Yeah.
And what got me thinking about it, though, was that, I'm imagining these environments that we could create, that you walk in and your mind is, transformed or shifted into a certain mode, and, you're enabled to solve a certain set of complex problems.
Right.
Man might be an example of something, similar to.
Sure. But look, if you said to me, you have to come back to the office because I said so, and here's your desk, I'd be like, whatever. But if you said to me, look, you have to come back to this incredibly inspiring space, with whatever the definition of inspiring is. And when you get there, again, you are gonna feel compelled, and then also enabled to do amazing, collaborative, innovative work with a group of really amazing, teammates, whatever. I'd say sign me up, and maybe not every day, right? I still have to do kind of the day-to-day work, right? Which I can do right here from my beautifully restored barn in Santa Cruz, California. Um, but there's going to be plenty of times when that's going to be not only the choice that the company will mandate, they won't even have to mandate it. I'm going to want to go there, right? So, and quite frankly, I'm not going to be able to produce what you want me to produce from a collaboration innovation perspective unless I go there, right? Well, that's a very, very different value proposition than hey, we just spent $100 million on this beautiful building. Now everybody please come.
Let me shift the conversation a little bit, because I'm thinking, you work at a company called Google, which is, based on a lot of, data analysis, facts kinds of things. And if we look at what's happening in the workplace now, we're collecting massive amounts of data. I don't know that we know what to do with all of it, but from your perspective, are there key data points that are of interest to you that you think will have an impact on the way that we think about space?
Yeah, I think, and I've sort of mentioned this already. If we can collect data around the idea of, and I mean like we, the royal we, not we Google. If we can collect data on where people go to get different kinds of work done and why they choose to go there, right? Jeremy spends 30% of his time at a space that he self-identifies as a place where he can get focused work done, right? And that's important because I like going to coffee shops to get focused work done. Kind of a weird thing, but it actually works for me, right? The background noise and everything and the sort of buzz helps me kind of come into myself and, really focus on what I need to get done. So Jeremy self-identifies that as a place to get focused work done. He spends 30% of his time there. Bob, goes into his dark cave, 80% of his time to get focused work done. Like, how do you kind of pull all that together? And then, it's focused work, it's collaborative work, it's social, it's learning, all these different things, meetings and collaboration. Like, how do you sort of triangulate that at an individual and then at an individual level and then sort of an aggregate level to say, okay, based on all this data that I have now, these are the kinds of spaces that I need to provide to people. Understanding that, the social space, quote unquote, that I built over here is actually where, some percentage of my employees go to do focused work, but let them tell you that. And don't sort of assume that because you created a social space over here and a heads down space over there, that's how people are going to use it. But that data to kind of help you sort of triangulate that stuff and say, okay, based on everything that I now need 80% social space because 30% of the people using it are actually doing collaborative work, or excuse me, doing focused work or whatever. So that would be sort of data nirvana for me.
Great. We were talking earlier about the Jetsons and how the Jetsons were created back in the mid 60s and
thus dating ourselves, but yes, go on.
I feel like we're kind of getting close to that. I mean, and then what I'm thinking is, okay, if Hanna-Barbera were going to make a new cartoon today, what would that look like? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Oh man, I loved Hanna-Barbera cartoons. it's funny. I think it would look a lot of the same, because think about what the Jetsons was. And again, for those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, you'll just have to bear with me for the next 60 seconds, right?
Just
I mean, it was still, it was still, right, Google it. And click on some ads when you're there. I think it was this futuristic world, right? With like robots and spaceships and stuff like that. But, it was still, if you think about the storyline, right? It was still like a human story, right? It was, family drama, and it was, George Jetson and Mr. Spacely, who was his boss, not getting along. Like, like ever was it thus and ever will it be? We are these people, these fundamental people who just evolved so slowly compared to everything else around us that, that whatever we do in the future, we are still going to be the same people that we've kind of always been. And we're going to be wonderful and magical and messy. And that part really isn't going to change anytime soon. So I guess, if there's a message to kind of leave you with in all of this, as I look at the clock, it's that, people are still people, and understanding kind of what makes people tick and being able to empathize with people and be able to connect with people on a real human level, that's not going away anytime soon. So your Jetsons robots and your AR, VR and all this sort of stuff, like, yeah, tools, wonderful, wonderful tools, operated by and for the benefit of people trying to do something cool together.
So last question, we've got Richard Branson, Elon Musk, and Jeff Bezos all going into outer space. So what does that bode for the workplace of the future?
I mean, I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid. My honest answer is nothing. You know what I mean? Like, it's swell for those guys, but again, it's we are this terrestrial species that, minus some crazy forcing function that causes us to terraform some planet 15 light years from now, we are who we are, we are where we are, and that's ever was the case and ever will be the case. And that's the big constraint that we ultimately have to work within, no matter what we do, what we build with sticks and bricks and bits and bytes.
So Jeremy, we're ending, a 5-week series, talking about the pandemic and getting back to work. So I'm going to give you the last word here. Your thoughts, what do you see coming down the road?
What I see coming down the road, at least over the course of again, the first, 6 to 12 months of this fundamental shift that I've been talking about, is whether or not you give employees choice, they're gonna feel empowered to take it. So be ready for that and be open to that, and think and plan and design around that. And again, the sort of last idea again is that whatever you decide to do over those courses of the next 6 to 12 months are but the very first baby steps in trying to rethink what this world's going to look like from a workplace and real estate perspective over the next century. It's that big of a shift. So whether you wanted to or not, if you're in this business, you are literally on the cutting edge of this, and be bold, experiment. I saw in some of the chat, trust your people, treat them like adults, and don't be afraid to play with stuff and iterate and do great stuff.
Jeremy, hey, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks. I really.
Yeah, I can't believe the whole hour is gone already.
But anyway, I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing with us your thoughts about the workplace and the future and the ecosystem and people and all of that fun stuff. So just before we go, I just want to thank you. I want to thank all of our speakers. This has been a great series of programs that we've had. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Envoy, HPFI, and Nook. We'll look forward to doing this again in the future. All of these sessions are recorded. They'll be on the site. If you signed up, you'll get them. If there's any questions or feedback that you have, we'd love to hear it. So thanks again, Jeremy. It's been a blast.
Yeah, this was fun. You promised it would be fun and you delivered.
Yeah. I'll see you in Santa Cruz pretty soon, I hope.
All right. I'll see you on your boat.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Take care.
See ya.